The world's most populous country is at a pivotal moment. For the first time in 6 decades, China's population is shrinking, with the national birth rate falling to a record low last year. The death rate, on the other hand, is on the rise. Analysts have dubbed the recent decline a demographic crisis, saying it will act as a long-term drag on China's economy. There are also concerns the country's social welfare and medical infrastructure are unprepared for an aging population. For more on this, we're joined by John Donaldson, Associate Professor from the School of Social Sciences at Singapore Management University. Now, Professor, data out of China shows population shrank last year for the first time in more than 6 decades. And we know much of the demographic downturn is because of its one-child policy. Help us to understand this.
So, for the longest time under Mao, before Deng Xiaoping's reforms in 1978, Mao Zedong's big strategy in terms of deterring invasion from the United States to fight the Cold War was to increase China's population. 人多力量大, the more people you have, the better. But by the time the late 1970s and early 1980s came around, it became a demographic nightmare. And very soon on that, there was a very strict one-child policy that was implemented. And then it worked extremely well, especially in the cities. It shrank the population growth rate. And we're starting to see those effects now where improvements in healthcare and other kinds of life extending technologies are running out of steam in terms of how long we can keep older people alive. But because of the declining birth rate, you're seeing today's turnaround.
Okay, still looking at the birth rate, apart from the one-child policy, it's a matter of affordability as well, because education is expensive, many Chinese choosing to have one or none. So apart from the pandemic, what other economic pressures are young Chinese facing?
It's actually the factor you said is now far more important. The one-child policy was relaxed in 2016 to allow 2 children per couple, and then more recently in 2021 to allow 3 children per couple. But the funny thing was that even after the relaxation, most urbanites were unwilling to have extra children because of the issues that you talked about: housing, the cost of education, the cost of raising children is just very tight within the cities and very difficult. So even the issue no longer is the one-child policy. That policy has been relaxed, but even after relaxation, people are not having children. In the rural areas, it's a different story. The one-child policy was never able to enforce it as strongly in rural areas. And even today, rural areas rural families are larger, far larger than urban families. And the only concern there, the main concern there, is in terms of education. China has some of the best universities in the world, but most of the universities are not up to par. And therefore, as China tries to lift its economy into a higher and higher technology, the question is whether it can lift its population, the young people it does have, up to meet those needs. But because of the urban-rural gap, you're having very few children in urban areas and many underqualified children in rural areas, which creates a major problem, a major headache, a long-term demographic problem for China as it tries to improve its economy.
So there are the challenges of a declining birth rate, and also more people are dying. So putting it all together, what are the challenges of a declining population coupled with this rapidly aging population and the implications for China's economic growth going forward?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to the issues of pension and healthcare and other kinds of issues that most Asian countries, that are aging face, these demographic challenges are really, really huge. But I wanted to remind people that China still has more than 1.4 billion people. China's not about to run out of people. It's still a huge population, and with that population, that huge population, becomes major problems, including ecological problems, including stress on the infrastructure, other issues like that. The hope was that the decline would be gradual enough that China could reduce the stress on the natural environment and other kinds of things, and land a population at a reasonable level. But because of the rapid decline that we're seeing and the rates are not turning around with the cancellation of the one-child policy, the fear is that they've overcorrected, that they're going to have too many elderly people, too few young people, which will have major effects on the economy and on China's future.
And Professor, the UN is predicting China could lose its status as the world's most populous country as early as April to India. So what implications will this have globally?
And so India has not had the same kinds of population control measures. India has a lot of young people, which people, and its population is growing rapidly. People say the youth in the population will create a dynamism with India. But some of those problems that we talked about overpopulation, right? China geographically is about the same size as the United States. 1.4 billion people in China, about 400 million in the United States. That's a lot of people. India now catching up with China is even smaller than China is. And so in terms of its, land, in terms of its ability to feed its own people, in terms of the ecological problems of having so much population, India is facing some upside that China won't be able to talk about, having younger people, more dynamic in the economy. But you weigh that against the ecological and other kinds of problems that having such a huge population in a relatively small place brings.
Professor, I would like your thoughts on how China's declining population might have an impact on mass outbound tourism in the future, given that travel is recovering after the pandemic. But moving forward, what's going to happen?
I think the problems that we're seeing in terms of tourism, I believe, will be short term in terms of COVID and other things like that. The wealthy among Chinese will start to travel again. I don't think you're going to see much of an effect on this, on tourism or on those kinds of service parts of the economy for long. Elderly people, older people enjoy traveling. They enjoy visiting places, but also they would, healthcare and other kinds of services will still become, quite robust. Will still be quite robust, and will still be quite vital. So short term, yes, it's a huge impact that you've seen reverberate throughout this COVID period. But I believe that will recover, and that today's population figures will not have that major an effect on those kinds of industries.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your insights, Professor. That was John Donaldson, Associate Professor from the School of Social Sciences at Singapore Management University.